Well, welcome to our 5-week small group series, Portraits in Courage. And I'm glad that you're joining us and you're going to be a part of this series. We're going to take a look at the life of Moses. And we're not going to be able to look at every chapter in the book of Exodus and Numbers and Deuteronomy and Leviticus, but we're going to look through some things and kind of take a look at the choices that he had to make, the choices that required courage. And not only Moses, but some of the people around him as they led the Israelites out of slavery, out of Egypt, and up to the promised land, up to the land of Canaan. And it's going to take many years actually for all this to take place, but there are going to be some lessons that they had to learn and that we can learn from observing them. So I'm glad that you're a part of this series. Be sure to also check out the Sunday morning series as well and kind of put everything together so you get as much of the picture that you can. I don't know about you, but high school was kind of rough for me. It was not my best 4 years by a long stretch. I had a number of rejections along the way. I once ran for school office. I think it was maybe sergeant at arms during my sophomore year, and the voters rejected my candidacy. I wanted to join the golf team, and the coach asked about my score, and I told him what I typically shot, and he said, "No thanks." My senior year, one girl that I asked to the prom basically almost literally said she was hoping for a better offer. There was another guy, a mutual friend, and she was hoping he would take her, and so she wanted to wait and see if he would ask her or not. As I got older, there were indeed far more yeses, but still many times I heard thanks, but no thanks. Churches that I applied to who said, and we're going in another direction. A publisher that I had submitted some work to said, what I'd written really didn't fit what they were looking for. A graduate program that I looked into said they really didn't like my undergraduate degree, didn't think it would be a good fit. And I got to be honest, those rejections stung, and they typically do. And I'm sure each of you has had could compile your own list of rejections, which have stung just as badly. But we also know that those rejections, those moments of disappointment, those moments when someone said no, were not the whole story. They don't comprise the entire story of our life. And this week, as we begin this series, Portraits in Courage, we do so by looking at the rejection Moses experienced when he tried to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. First, let's quickly put Moses' story into context here, where we're at. So in Genesis, we read about the creation of the universe, the earth, and then all of its inhabitants, including Adam and Eve, who, though they had it all, they chose themselves over God. And then they and all of creation fell with them. As we went through Genesis, we saw how humanity spiraled more and more into violence and sin to the point that God chose to cleanse the world, to recreate the world in a sense with a flood, beginning anew with Noah and his family. A couple of chapters later, we'd see how God would call Abraham to become the father of a new nation in a land that he would give to his many descendants. And this promise would be carried on through Abraham's son Isaac, and then Isaac's son Jacob, and then through Jacob's 12 sons. These sons would find themselves in Egypt due to a famine in the land of Canaan. And at first, they were honored and they were welcomed guests. But as generations went by, eventually they were enslaved out of fear that they would join Egypt's enemies against Egypt. Generations later, 2 of those slaves were Moses' parents. And his mother saved Moses from an infanticide ordered by the current Pharaoh by placing him in a basket in the Nile where he was found by Pharaoh's daughter. Now, the first part of Exodus chapter 2 tells us that Moses was adopted by Pharaoh's daughter, but was nursed by his own mother. And while some movies portray Moses as unaware of his Hebrew heritage, it's more likely he was aware of who his biological family was. As we saw this past Sunday, Moses' attempt at intervening for his people led him to kill an Egyptian, but only to have the Israelites rebuff him and Pharaoh seek to kill him, and this led him to flee to Midian. After 40 years there, God called him to go back to Egypt and lead his people to freedom, to lead his people to the promised land. Now, Moses' fear was palpable, and he pushed back on the idea, leading God to give the concession of allowing Aaron, his brother, to do most of the talking. And so we read this, as Moses and Aaron brought together all the elders of the Israelites. This is now after they've gone back, Moses has gone back to Egypt. And Aaron told them everything the Lord had said to Moses. He also performed the signs before the people that God had given for them to carry out. And they believed. And when they heard that the Lord was concerned about them and had seen their misery, the misery they had there in slavery, they bowed down and they worshiped. And then we go into chapter 5. It says, afterward, Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Let my people go, so that they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness. And Pharaoh said, who is the Lord, that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go. Then they said, the God of the Hebrews has met with us. Now let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God, or he may strike us with plagues or with sword. But the king of Egypt said, Moses and Aaron, why are you taking the people away from their labor? Get back to your work. Then Pharaoh said, look, the people of the land are now numerous, and you are stopping them from working. Now we see one of the rejections that Moses first encounters, and that is an appeal of his is rejected by Pharaoh. They make an appeal. Let us go. Let us go out to have a festival. Let us go out and offer sacrifices. And that is just rejected by Pharaoh. Now, the good news is God had already told Moses, this is going to happen. Don't worry. But sometimes when people tell us something, especially something of assurance, when we finally meet that event, we sometimes forget the assurance that we were given. And then we're told that that same day, Pharaoh gave this order to the slave drivers and overseers in charge of the people. You are no longer to supply the people with straw for making bricks. Let them go and gather their own straw. Then the slave drivers and the overseers went out and said to the people, this is what Pharaoh says. I will not give you any more straw. Go and get your own straw wherever you can find it, but your work will not be reduced at all. So the people scattered all over the Egypt to gather stubble to use for straw. The slave drivers kept pressing them, saying, complete the work required of you each day, just as when you had straw. And Pharaoh's slave drivers beat the Israelite overseers they had appointed, demanding, why haven't you met your quota of bricks yesterday or today as before? You begin to see the picture of what's developing here. You've got a quota of bricks you've got to do. We used to supply you with the straw that would go in with the mud to make the bricks, but we're not doing that anymore. Now you've got to do double duty. You've got only to make the bricks, but you got to go find that straw to use. So the Israelite overseers went and they appealed to Pharaoh and said, why have you treated your servants this way? Your servants are given no straw, yet we are told, make bricks. Your servants are being beaten, but the fault is with your own people. And Pharaoh said, lazy. That's what you are. You're lazy. That is why you keep saying, let us go and sacrifice to the Lord. Now get back to work. You will not be given any straw, yet you must produce your full quota of bricks. The Israelite overseers, we're told, realized they were in trouble when they were told, you are not to reduce the number of bricks required of you for each day. When they left Pharaoh, they found Moses and Aaron to meet them. And they said, may the Lord look on you and judge you. You have made us obnoxious to Pharaoh and his officials and have put a sword in their hand to kill us. So here's the second rejection we're seeing in this account here. Moses' leadership rejected by the Israelites. And now at first they're all like, great, God's going to lead us out. But as soon as there's any pushback, as soon as there's any problem, Moses, what have you done to us? Now we're going to see this theme time and time again in the book of Exodus, where the people come back and say, what have you done? You've let us out here only but we're going to get trapped between an army and the Red Sea. Then they're going to need water, and they're going to need food and all these things. And every time they're like, Moses, why'd you do this? Why'd you do this to us? So Moses, he gets all this, and so he goes and says, Moses returned to the Lord and said, why, Lord, have you brought trouble on this people? Is this why you sent me? Lord, what is all of this about? He says, ever since I went to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has brought trouble on this people. And you've not rescued your people at all. Now here's another rejection of sorts, and that is Moses rejecting God's call. Now, it's not so much an outright rejection, but he's doubting it. He's doubting God's call and saying, "What? This is ridiculous, what you've set us up for, Lord. I don't understand this." But then we have this. Then the Lord said to Moses, now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. Because of my mighty hand, he will let them go. Because of my mighty hand, he will drive them out of his country. He's not just going to let them go. He's going to push them out. So here's God's response to Moses and essentially to the Israelites. You just need to stand back. You need to watch and wonder. You need to just take it in, and you need to learn its lessons. Watch what I do. This is another theme that pops up over and over again in Scripture. Someone is afraid, and God or one of his representatives says, watch me work. Watch the Lord work. You're going to see something now. Now, this kind of begs the question, why make us get to that point? Why make us go, Lord, why didn't you just do everything in advance? Why didn't you just snowplow ahead of us and make it easy? I think it's to teach us to trust him. To get to that moment of choice, of decision, that sometimes involves fear on our part. We have to say, okay, what's going to happen? What will I do? Will I try to solve this problem on my own? Will I let the Lord intervene? Will I turn to my enemies and hope for their rescue? What will I do? And so I think God lets us get to that point where we have to go, there's no other rescue coming except what God provides. We typically learn best when we're eager to know something, when we want to know something. And God wants us to learn to trust him, to rely on him, to believe his word. As you process this week's text together as a group, I want you to also think about what you are afraid of right now. And ask yourself what a courageous trust in God might look like for that thing you're afraid of. What does that look like for you in this time? Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.